Today, I'll be reading to you the continuation of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. And I'll start reading from where we left off. So, Chapter 3. Chapter 3. Well, I got a good going over in the morning from old Miss Watson on account of my clothes, but the widow, she didn't scold, but only cleaned off the grease and clay and looked so sorry that I thought I would behave a while if I could. Then Miss Watson, she took me in the closet and prayed, but nothing came of it. She told me to pray every day, and whatever I asked for, I would get it. But it weren't so. I tried it. Once I got a fish line, but no hooks. It weren't any good to me without hooks. I tried for the hooks 3 or 4 times, but somehow I couldn't make it work. By and by, one day, I asked Miss Watson to try for me, but she said I was a fool. She never told me why, and I couldn't make it out no way. I sat down, one time, back in the woods, and had a long think about it. I says to myself, if a body can get anything they pray for, why don't Deacon Wynne get back the money he lost on pork? Why can't the widow get back her silver snuff box that she was stole? Why can't Miss Watson fat up? No, says I to myself, there ain't nothing in it. I went and told the widow about it, and she said the thing a body could get. And she said the thing a body could get by praying for it was spiritual gifts. This was too many for me, but she told me what she meant. I must help other people and do everything I could for other people and look out for them all the time and never think about myself. This was including Miss Watson, as I took it. I went out into the woods and turned it over in my head a long time, but I couldn't see no advantage about it, except for the other people, so at last I reckoned I wouldn't worry about it anymore, but just let it go. Sometimes the widow would take me one side and talk about Providence in a way to make a body's mouth water, but maybe next day Miss Watson would take hold and knock it all down again. I judged I could see that there was 2 providences, and a poor chap would stand a considerable show with the widow's providence. But if Miss Watson's got him, there weren't no help for him anymore. I thought it all out and reckoned I would belong to the widow's if he wanted me, though I couldn't make out how he was a-going to be any better off then than what he was before, seeing I was so ignorant and so kind of low down and ornery. Pop, he hadn't been seen for more than a year, and that was comfortable for me. I didn't want to see him no more. He used to always whale me when he was sober and could get his hands on me, though I used to take to the woods most of the time when he was around. Well, about this time, he was found in the river drowned, above 12 mile above town, so people said. They judged it was him anyway. Said this drowned man was just his size, and was ragged, and had uncommon long hair, which was all like Pop, but they couldn't make nothing out of the face, because it had been in the water so long it weren't much like a face at all. They said he was floating on his back in the water. They took him and buried him on the bank, but I weren't comfortable long, because I happened to think of something. I knowed mighty well that a drowned man don't float on his back, but on his face. So I knowed then that this weren't Pop, but a woman dressed up in a man's clothes. So I was uncomfortable again. I judged the old man would turn up again by and by, though I wished he wouldn't. We played robber now and then about a month, and then I resigned. All the boys did. We hadn't robbed nobody. We hadn't killed any people, but only just pretended. We used to hop out of the woods and and go charging down on hog drovers and women in carts taking garden stuff to market, but we never hived any of them. Tom Sawyer called the hogs ingots, and he called the turnips and stuff jewelry, and we would go to the cave and powwow over what we had done and how many people we had killed and marked, but I couldn't see no profit in it. One time, Tom sent a boy to run about town with a blazing stick, which was the sign for the gang to get together. And then he said he had got a secret news by his spies that next day a whole parcel of Spanish merchants and rich Arabs was going to camp in Cave Hollow with 200 elephants and 600 camels and over 1,000 sumpter mules, all loaded down with diamonds, and they didn't have only a guard of 400 soldiers. And so we were laying ambuscade, as he called it, and killed the lot and scooped the things. He said we must slick up our swords and guns and get ready. He never could go after even a turnip cart, but he must have the swords and guns all scored up for it, though they was only lath and broomsticks, and you might score at them till you rotted, and then they weren't worth a mouthful of ashes more than what they was before. I didn't believe we could lick such a crowd of Spaniards and Arabs, but I wanted to see the camels and elephants. So I was on hand next day, Saturday, in the ambuscade, and when we got the word, we rushed out of the woods and down the hill. But there weren't no Spaniards and Arabs, and there weren't no camels nor elephants. It weren't anything but a Sunday school picnic, and only a primer class at that. We busted it up and chased the children up in Hollow, but we never got anything but some donuts and jam, though Ben Rogers got a rag doll and Joe Harper got a hymn book and a tract. And then the teacher charged in and made us drop everything and cut. I didn't see no diamonds, and I told Tom Sawyer so. He said there was loads of them there, anyway, and he said there was Arabs there too, and elephants and things. I said, why couldn't we see them then? He said if I weren't so ignorant, but had read a book called Don Quixote, I would know without asking. He said it was all done by enchantment. He said there was hundreds of soldiers there, and elephants and treasure and so on, but we had enemies which called magicians, and they had turned the whole thing into an infant Sunday school just out of spite. I said, all right, then the things for us to do was to go for the magicians. Tom Sawyer said I was a numbskull. Why, says he, a magician could call up a lot of genies, and they would hash you up like nothing before you could say Jack Robinson. They are as tall as a tree and as big around as a church. Well, I say, suppose we get some genies to help us. Can't we lick the other crowd then? How you going to get them? I don't know. How do they get them? Why, they rub an old tin lamp or an iron ring, and then the genies come tearing in, with the thunder and lightning a-ripping around, and the smoke a-rolling, and everything they're told to do, they up and do it. They don't think nothing of pulling a shot tower up by the roots, and belting a Sunday school superintendent over the head with it, or any other man. Who makes them tear around so? Why, whoever rubs the lamp or the ring. They belong to whoever rubs the lamp or the ring, and they've got to do whatever he says. If he tells them to build a palace 40 miles long out of diamonds, and fill it full of chewing gum or whatever you want, and fetch an emperor's daughter from China for you to marry, they've got to do it, and they've got to do it before sunup next morning too. And more, they've got to waltz that palace around over the country wherever you want it, you understand? Well, says I think they are a pack of flatheads for not keeping the palace themselves instead of fooling them away like that. And what's more, if I was one of them, I would see a man in Jericho before I would drop my business and come to him for the rubbing of an old tin lamp. How you talk, Huck Finn. Why, you'd have to come when he rubbed it, whether you wanted to or not. What, an eye as high as a tree and as big as a church? Alright then, I would come, but I lay I'd make that man climb the highest tree there was in the country. Shucks, it ain't no use to talk to you, Huck Finn. You don't seem to know anything, somehow. Perfect saphead. I thought all this over for 2 or 3 days, and then I reckoned I would see if there was anything in it. I got an old tin lamp, an iron ring, and went out into the woods and rubbed until I sweat like an Injun, calculating to build a palace and sell it, but it weren't no use. None of the genies come. So then I judged that all that stuff was only just one of Tom Sawyer's lies. I reckon he believed in the Arabs and the elephants, but as for me, I think different. It had all the marks of a Sunday school. Chapter 4. Well, 3 or 4 months run along, and it was well into the winter now. I had been to school most all the time, and could spell and read and write just a little, and could say the multiplications table up to 6 times 7 is 35. And I don't reckon I could ever get any further than that if I was to live forever. I don't take no stock in mathematics anyway. At first I hated the school, but by and by I got so I could stand it. Whenever I got uncommon tired, I played hooky, and the hiding I got next day done me good and cheered me up. So the longer I went to school, the easier it got to be. I was getting sort of used to the widow's ways, too, and they weren't so raspy on me. Living in the house and sleeping in the bed pulled on me pretty tight, mostly, but before the cold weather, I used to slide out and sleep in the woods sometimes, and so that was a rest to me. I liked the old ways best, but I was getting so I liked the new ones, too, a little bit. The widow said I was coming along slow but sure, and doing very satisfactory. She said she weren't ashamed of me. One morning, I happened to turn over the salt cellar at breakfast. I reached for some of it as quick as I could to throw over my left shoulder and keep off the bad luck, but Miss Watson wasn't ahead of me and crossed me off. She says, "Take your hands away, Huckleberry. What a mess you are always making." The widow put in a good word for me, but that weren't going to keep off the bad luck. I knowed that well enough. I started out after breakfast feeling worried and shaky and wondering where it was going to fall on me and what it was going to be. There is ways to keep off some kinds of bad luck, but there wasn't one for them kind. So I never tried to do anything, but just poked along low-spirited and on the watch out. I went down the front garden and clumb over the stile where you go through the high board fence. There was an inch of new snow on the ground, and I seen somebody's tracks. They had come up from the quarry and stood around the stile a while, and then went on around the garden fence. It was funny they hadn't come in after standing around so. I couldn't make it out. It was very curious somehow. I was going to follow around, but I stooped down to look at the tracks first. I didn't notice anything at first, but next I did. There was a cross in the left boot heel made with the big nails to keep off the devil. I was up in a second and shining down the hill. I looked over my shoulder every now and then, but I didn't see nobody. I was at Judge Thatcher's as quick as I could get there. He said, "Why, my boy, you are all out of breath. Did you come for your interest?" "No, sir," I says. "Is there some for me?" "Oh yes, a half-yearly is in last night. Over $150, quite a fortune for you. You better let me invest it along with your 6,000, because if you take it, you'll spend it." "No, sir," I says. "I don't want to spend it. I don't want it at all, nor the 6,000 nother. I want you to take it. I want to give it to you, the 6,000 and all." He looked surprised. He couldn't seem to make it out. He says, "Why? What can you mean, my boy?" I says, "Don't you ask me no questions about it, please. You'll take it, won't you?" He says, "Well, I'm puzzled. Is something the matter?" "Please take it," says I, "and don't ask me nothing that I won't have to tell no lies." He studied a while, and then he says, "Oh ho, oh, I think I see. You want to sell all of your property to me, not give it. That's the correct idea." Then he wrote something on the paper and read it over and says, "There, you see it says for consideration. That means I have bought it of you and paid you for it. Here's $1 for you, now you sign it." So I signed it and left. Miss Watson's bleep, Jim, had a hairball as big as your fist, which had been took out of the fourth stomach of an ox, and he used to do magic with it. He said there was a spirit inside of it, and it knowed everything. So I went to him that night and told him Pop was here again, for I found his tracks in the snow. What I wanted to know was what he was going to do, and was he going to stay? Jim got out his hairball and said something over it, and then he held it up and dropped it on the floor. It fell pretty solid and only rolled up about an inch. Jim tried it again and then another time, and it acted just the same. Jim got down on his knees and put his ears against it and listened, but it weren't no use. He said it wouldn't talk. He said sometimes it wouldn't talk without money. I told him I had an old slick counterfeit quarter that weren't no good because the brass showed through the silver a little and it wouldn't pass nohow, even if the brass didn't show, because it was so slick it felt greasy, and so that would tell on it every time. I reckon I wouldn't say nothing about the $1 I got from the judge. I said it was pretty bad money, but maybe the hairball would take it, because maybe it wouldn't know the difference. Jim smelt it and bit it and rubbed it and said he would manage so the hairball would think it was good. He said he would split open a raw Irish potato and stick the quarter in between and keep it there all night, and next morning you couldn't see no brass and it wouldn't feel greasy no more, and so anybody in town would take it in a minute, let alone a hairball. Well, I know the potato would do that before, but I had forgot it. Jim put the quarter under the hairball and got down and listened again. This time he said the hairball was all right. He said it would tell my whole fortune if I wanted it to. I says, "Go on." So the hairball talked to Jim, and Jim told it to me. He says, "Your all father don't know yet what he's a-goin' do. Sometimes he spec he'll go away, and then again he spec he'll stay. Best way is to rest easy and let the old man take his own way. They's 2 angels hovering round about him. One of 'em is white and shiny, and the other one is black. The white one gets him to go right a little while, then the black one sail in and bust it all up. A body can't tell yet which one gone to fetch him at the last, but you is all right. You've gone to have considerable trouble in your life, and considerable joy. Sometimes you're going to get hurt, and sometimes you're going to get sick, but every time you're going to get well again. They's 2 gals flying about you in your life. One of 'em's light and the other one is dark. One is rich and the other poor. You've gone to marry the poor, one's first and the rich one by and by. You wants to keep away from the water as much as you can, and don't run no risk. Case it's down in the bells that you've gone to get hung. When I lit my candle and went up to my room that night, there sat Pop, his own self. Okay, so that was the end of chapter 4. I was thinking maybe I could read 2 more chapters, but I think my throat is getting a little sore, so I'll stop here. I hope that this story helped you fall asleep. If it wasn't long enough, you could combine it with the first 2 chapters I read. I put them in a playlist, so you can check out the bedtime story playlist and maybe put it on loop. That could help too. But yeah, whatever that works for you. If you did fall asleep, good night. Don't let the bed bugs bite. And I'll see you next time.